Man, what is wrong with Jalen Hurts? Since he got all that money, he looks like Jalen is hurt. We'll talk about that and more with Kevin Ostrich on Locked On NFL.
The barbershop is open and Tony Wiggins has a chair for you. He's ready with some real NFL talk. The local experts of Locked On bring their expertise, and Wiggy is ready with his clippers and shears. Sit down and enjoy. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Thank you for joining us here, and welcome to the new Locked On NFL, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with the help of our local experts that know your favorites like no one else. I'm the host, the barber Tony Wiggins, joined today by Locked On NFL expert Kevin Ostrich. Now, check this out. Here's what we're going to talk about today. The rebirth of Sam Darnold is amazing, and we're going to hit that in segment 3. Segment 2, the Chiefs and the Cowboys are dealing with injuries to key stars. But first, is Jalen Hurts overrated? It's going to be the question that we ask and answer today. We appreciate making you our first listen here of the day and being an everyday here on Locked On NFL, which is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you tune in again to Locked On NFL tomorrow morning for the madman Tyler Rowland for more NFL coverage. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is where you can go to get tickets for anything. Make sure you download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. All right, Kevin Ostrich, what's going on, man? And we are going to talk about quarterbacks, and mainly we're going to talk about Jalen Hurts. Have you noticed anything about Jalen Hurts? Because to me, I always look at him with all of that body armor and how big he is, and they keep talking about how much he lifts weights, and that's not really a prerequisite for a lot of quarterbacks, but he just doesn't look like the same guy he did 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I think, Wig, it comes down to I think he's just being a little reckless with the ball here. I mean, he has 27 turnovers since the start of last season, and really hasn't been that great this year with it either. Has a turnover in every single game this year, and part of it is, he hasn't had guys like A.J. Brown at his disposal, Devonta Smith at his disposal at times this year too. But these great quarterbacks, Wig, you have to be an elevator. You have to work with what's around you. And, you acquire Jahan Dotson to try to be your third wide receiver, and all of a sudden he's your number one for a week. And you have Dallas Goedert and others as well. You bring in Saquon Barkley. But for Jalen, he gets this huge contract and those big guys to get the money. Like Patrick Mahomes is an elevator. He hasn't had these great receiving corps. He's had a great weapon here and a great weapon there. He had Tyreek and Travis for a while. Obviously, Rashee Rice is there now. Travis is still there. Josh Allen has Stephon Diggs, and he was working with him for a while. Lamar has had Mark Andrews, and you can go on and on with those quarterbacks. But more often than not, they haven't had all of this great talent around them. They've had to elevate others. And it seems like for Jalen Hurts, when his stars go down, and A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, he hasn't been able to elevate the others around him. But it goes a little beyond that, Wig, because this has been going on for a lot longer than just the last couple of weeks.
You're right. And I was going to make sure we hit that and talk just about that. But first, if you don't believe us, listen to the guys from Locked On Eagles, and they'll tell you exactly what I'm talking about, as they actually started to compare Jalen Hurts to another quarterback who got paid, Carson Wentz. Check this out.
The other thing was Carson lost a lot of his elusiveness, the ability to create outside of structure. And Jalen Hurts, while he's had his moments this year as a runner, and he's still more mobile than most quarterbacks, somebody was tweeting out mobile highlights of Jalen from 2021, the way he was cutting, getting to the edge. Do not gaslight my eyes, people. I know what I'm watching. This is not the same explosive scrambler that we saw 2 years ago. I don't know what that injury was last year, but it affected him long-term, just like Carson did.
Yeah, see, so they're already trying to sound the alarm in Philly because this looks too familiar to a bad situation that they actually remember with another quarterback. The thing about him is, you're right, it actually did start way before these last couple of weeks. It's just that he doesn't look like the same guy. I don't know if he's hurt. I don't know if he's just banged up from all of those tush pushes or whatever that is that they call that, and all lifting all of those weights. To me, Kevin, everything just looks like just a labor. He looks like a 35-year-old player who plays strong safety or middle linebacker, every time his body language just looks like he's just not the same quarterback as he was. And I think that bodes pretty sadly for the Eagles.
Yeah, and it doesn't even seem like the confidence is really there as much anymore. Where I think when we saw him earlier in his career, as we were kind of talking about him as the next great thing, and he was showing it, he had confidence. Like, he knew when to take off. He knew when to scramble. He knew when to throw to his guys. And it was that dual threat ability that we've seen with so many other guys in this league. But over these last couple of years, it just doesn't seem like he's as confident in his decisions. And maybe that is the body thing, where it's like, does he trust himself enough to be able to take a rushing lane and not get clobbered and feel like, he can do that as effectively as he used to? It seems like, to me, Jalen's somebody who is trying to adapt to how he feels now as opposed to who he was then. And who he was then was somebody that could beat you in so many different ways. But now it's like you take some of that away, and all of a sudden it's like, well, you're not so much Superman anymore. You got to, take some of your superpowers away and try to live without them. And it's hard when that's something you relied on in those years that you went to the Super Bowl and you were great. So it's a tough situation he's in right now, because I think he's a really talented player still. But, man, whatever injury it was, if it's affecting him long-term, it's going to be an issue for the rest of his career. I mean, Philly fans have gone through this once, as the guys talked about with Carson Wentz. It would be crazy if they went through it again with, who ended up being Carson's backup, now turned starter, and they kind of go through the whole cycle once more.
Yeah, and I know, covering Baltimore as well as anyone, I like athletic quarterbacks. I like guys who can be multifaceted. I like guys to use their legs. What I don't like is when teams try to play through that athleticism too much. And what it does is guys start to take hits, and those hits, I believe, start to accumulate over a period of time, and then the quarterback ends up losing his effectiveness no matter who you put around him. So it's going to be interesting to see how they move forward. And then everybody wants to fire Nick Sirianni too. And I'm not sure that they're wrong about that. However, that's a tough situation, and that's a tough town to be dealing with that kind of uncertainty too at coach and quarterback. Speaking of uncertainty, there are some teams around the National Football League that had high hopes coming into the season, and they're dealing with a lot of injuries, namely the Kansas City Chiefs and the Dallas Cowboys. They are not the same, though. One of those teams is undefeated, and the other one, they're barely hanging on. We'll discuss that here in segment 2 on Locked On NFL. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by FanDuel, man. FanDuel is, quite frankly, it's America's #1 sportsbook. That is just the flat out truth. And you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel. Look, when you're in the middle of the game and you're watching your bets, you get a hunch in the middle of the game, and you can check the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And then you don't have to refresh the page. You don't have to leave the page. It's all on the same page where you make your bets. So you get to zoom in on that action. A lot of us think that if we're watching it, we can help control it, right? And the first thing you'll do is you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, when you place your first $5 bet. I'm going to repeat that. You'll get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel, FanDuel.com. It's America's #1 sportsbook. All right, segment number 2 with my brother, Kevin Ostraker of Locked On NFL, here talking about everything that's going on in the National Football League, including the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs seem like they always replace people that they depend on that get hurt, right? Yeah. It's a little bit different, though, when you do that every other year or year after year after year. They've already lost Isaiah Pacheco. Now it appears an ACL has caused them to lose Rashee Rice. That's a big, big loss at this time of the season for them.
Yeah, and really in the wide receiver room, their whole plan was to upgrade and obviously build around Rashee Rice, and they bring in Hollywood Brown, and he's now done for what's probably the remainder of the regular season, if not all the playoffs as well. Now you're dealing with this Rashee Rice situation, and all of a sudden it's, oh, well, who's it going to be now? You know, guys like Justin Watson have to step up. Juju Smith-Schuster, a second time over there. Is he going to be somebody? They have a bit of a wide receiver problem over there in Kansas City because as great as Patrick Mahomes is, and honestly, he's played pretty poorly this year overall by his standards. Right. But with who he is, despite that, they need to get him some help because two of their top receivers out for the season. It might get a little scary there, especially with Travis Kelce not looking like himself either.
Yep. Listen to what the guys from Locked On Chief have to say about that exact same thing.
But how do they adapt to going forward without this? I mean, they'll probably have to bring somebody up from the practice squad. I'm not sure that you're talking about anybody who's going to make a needle changer here. I don't know if there's anybody that will dramatically tilt the room all of a sudden and give you something that you don't have. So you're going to have to get more from the people that you do have. And that means more from Travis Kelce. It means more from Xavier Worthy. There's going to have to be at least a marginal step up from other contributors, whether it's a Justin Watson or a Juju Smith-Schuster. I mean, you're not going to turn any of these guys all of a sudden into a 100-yard receiver like Rashee Rice, but you're going to have to get something. And I think we saw today, you know what? This team is going to end up leaning a lot more on Kareem Hunt than they probably planned and had hoped to.
Strike, I'm going to throw a name at you real quick because I know everybody's throwing all these names around, but I think the name to watch out for here is Amari Cooper.
Yeah, wouldn't shock me. And I'll tell you why, Wig, because one, I don't think he wants to be in Cleveland anymore. I think he saw his name get thrown into those Brandon Ayuk conversations, and then Brandon Ayuk said, I don't really want to go over there to Cleveland. And then right. Cleveland was just kind of standing there with like, oh, all right, well, we just kind of showed our hand. And Amari like, sorry, but now we'll have you back. And Amari's kind of like, nah, I don't really mess with that. So they converted his salary into a signing bonus, almost all of it. By the time the trade deadline rolls around, I believe that's going to be right around $600,000 that a team would have to send back in order to make the money work. So look, it's an affordable contract. And while he does lead the league in drops, he's a far upgrade from what they have now. There are a couple other names, Wig, I'm sure you'll mention a couple of them, but I would not be shocked, especially with Cleveland just spiraling right now, if they want to see if they can salvage any value from Amari this year.
Yeah, the other names that you think that I'm going to mention probably DeAndre Hopkins. Yep. Even though the Titans won today, they're still not going anywhere. And then the 0-4 team that I cover, folks are starting to whisper the name Christian Kirk to see if the Jaguars will get off of that. I think of all three of those guys, I would go in the order that we just talked about them. I'd go Cooper. Then I go D-Hop because I think D-Hop's probably lost a step. But with the role that they want him to play, I think he'd be perfect. Christian Kirk's a little bit more expensive, and I don't know if he gives them a whole lot more than they have now because of his size. Some other people that are dealing with injuries, and they're not undefeated, by the way, the Dallas Cowboys. Even though they did have a gutsy win just the other day, it seems like with Dallas, you're always kind of waiting for everything to kind of fall apart, right? And this is not a spoof on Stephen A. Smith's little shtick that he does with the Cowboys, but you kind of do always wait for something bad to happen. The one thing I don't ever try to anticipate, though, are injuries, and they have a whole bunch of them right now. And listen to Marcus Mosher and Landon McCool discuss that on Locked On Cowboys.
Can the Dallas Cowboys find a way to win without Micah Parsons and Tank Lawrence for the foreseeable future? Overall, a good week for the Cowboys, but it's a costly week.
Yes.
Let's start with the big injury news. DeMarcus Lawrence has a mid-foot sprain. It's that bad word that we don't want to say, Liz Frank. Now, the good news for the Cowboys here is that DeMarcus Lawrence doesn't have to have surgery. If he had to have surgery, probably out for the entire 2024 season. But the Cowboys are going to place him on the injured reserve list, meaning that he's going to miss at least 4 games. I've got to imagine, Landon, this is probably going to be more like 8 games, and that the hope is that you can get him back maybe after Thanksgiving. But this is a long-term absence that the Cowboys are bracing for here.
You know, we're going to talk about the Parsons injury here in a bit, and that was obviously the one that we were the most concerned with coming out of the game, just because it's Parsons, right? Turns out that one seems a little bit light, and this is the Lawrence one that is really the more concerning of the two, and especially because he's a veteran player.
Big time problems in Dallas, as if they didn't have enough already. Their defense has not played well this year. Both injuries to me are pretty bad. I think it's going to be too much for them to overcome. I don't even think they're going to make the playoffs.
Man, it's especially with the way the Commanders are playing right now. I mean, they've come out of nowhere as kind of and with the way Jalen Hurts is playing, with the way the Dallas is playing right now, everybody's talking about the Commanders. And so for Dallas, it's like, oh, well, if the Commanders weren't great and the Giants weren't great and the Eagles are kind of struggling, it's like, oh, maybe they could limp their way in. But I don't know. I think the NFC is a lot more competitive than people thought it was going to be this year. And for a Dallas team that, again, I mean, their playmakers are Dak, CD, and Jake Ferguson and Trevon Diggs. And those are like your core 4 guys right now. I mean, they don't have a running game. They don't have any wide receivers outside of CD. And on the defensive side of the ball, you rely on Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence to give you any sort of pressure. But now you have to rely on guys that are nowhere near that level. The run defense is already terrible. The linebacking group's already a question. In the secondary, it's Trevon Diggs, and they already are missing Deron Bland. And when he gets back, that'll be some boost. But Micah Parsons is like the guy on that defense and is like these, depending on how you feel about Dak, the second or third best player on that team, if not the best. So you have to be able to overcome that if you're Dallas, but I just don't think they have enough firepower because they are so star reliant. Where they don't have a team of like all these good, like medium level players and maybe 1 or 2 stars. They have like 5 or 6 stars and 2 of them have just gone down. And the rest of their roster is a bunch of, oh no, this might not be good. And that's a problem for them.
Yeah, that's a huge problem for them. And moving forward, I just don't think I don't see how they can overcome this attrition, because one of the things the Dallas Cowboys have done very well when they've been good is create turnovers. And this is going to hinder their ability to do just that. All right, here's what we're going to talk about in segment number 3, the rebirth of Sam Darnold. We're going to make sure we get to that in just a second here on Locked On NFL. Today's show is brought to you and sponsored by Game Time. Have you ever heard this? Have you ever heard somebody say, your lack of planning does not constitute an emergency on my part? Yeah, well, you won't hear it at Game Time because your lack of planning could have been for a whole bunch of reasons. You could have had to wait to get paid. You weren't sure you wanted to go. Maybe you got a last minute date. Well, you know what? Game Time specializes in last minute requests. They also have curated deals, and it makes it easier for you to find the best price on great seats. They filter out all of that stuff. They toggle it and get rid of all of the stuff that you just don't need to look at and focus on the tickets that you actually want to buy. So download the Game Time app today and create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, and this will help you take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code. I'll spell it for you. LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, third and final segment here on Locked On NFL, where it's your team every day. My man Sam Darnold, man, has done something that really makes you think. Like, I have a team where the quarterback is struggling a little bit and everybody wants to run Trevor Lawrence out of here every other day. And it makes you want to hesitate and think that, hey, maybe we need to pause a little bit on how we rush these quarterbacks in, no matter how many accolades they have in college, because Sam Darnold had them all. And he's bounced around the league. And now it seems like he is in a situation where it's a match made in heaven with him, Kevin O'Connell, and the Minnesota Vikings.
This is what dreams are made of for guys like this, man. I mean, I couldn't be happier for Sam Darnold. And I know a lot of people have talked about it. We've kind of hinted at this ourselves, Wig, but the best thing for your career is to get out of Carolina and go. Sam Darnold out of Carolina, Baker Mayfield out of Carolina. We'll see what happens with Bryce Young. But you got Justin Jefferson, you get Jordan Addison back. This defense is playing really well, and they have rattled off really impressive wins. And Green Bay almost came back on them on Sunday. They got out to that lead, and they held it down when they needed it to. So Darnold is a guy that you kind of wondered after his Jets tenure, like, what was this going to be for him? Was he going to ever find his footing again? We've seen so many of these stories fail where a top quarterback doesn't work out in his original situation. Right. They ship him off somewhere as a backup, and they never really find their footing again. Well, Sam Darnold, and again, who knows if we ever were going to see JJ McCarthy. I know it was going to be Darnold's show to start, and then if he struggled, maybe McCarthy comes in. But this is the Sam Darnold show this year from Minnesota. And man, I'll tell you, yeah, like in the future, you're talking next year and years beyond, the team's going to give him some money and see what he can do because he's showing a lot so far. And look, he's an MVP talks, man. This is something that's just, I couldn't even imagine this when we started the season.
Yeah, well, you're not the only ones. Peacock and Williamson couldn't imagine it either. Check out what they had to say about it.
Man, the Minnesota Vikings are really for real. So when you're looking at this season and you think, okay, a couple of weeks in, Sam Darnold, good story, looking pretty good. Third with week 3, all right, beat the 49ers in week 2 is pretty good. Now week 4, okay, division rival at the Packers. Jordan Love's back. Whipped up on them again in the first half. Looked like they were going to run away with that game. And so you really, again, like the Washington Commanders, especially offensively for the Commanders, where the Vikings are playing pretty well on defense too.
They are.
And you're forced to believe at this point. And Sam Darnold, by the way, making himself a lot of money, might get whether it's with the Vikings or somebody else next week, because he's going to be a free agent. He might be starter. He might
be a week 1 starter in 2025 somewhere.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. At the very least, he's got himself the same gig as a stopgap, but maybe even longer term.
They trade McCarthy. Who knows?
Especially if you're from that McVay Shanahan tree and you need a quarterback that can run that system. And he's been super impressive and hasn't been making a bunch of mistakes. And so, yeah, good on Sam Darnold. Good on the Minnesota Vikings side. There, you have to believe.
My man Williams has said they might trade McCarthy. Woo! That's a lot of high praise right now. But this is a real good situation for them to be in because now you don't have to rush the young guy, unlike the Indianapolis Colts. Not only have they rushed one of the most raw prospects I've ever seen at the quarterback spot in Anthony Richardson, but they also rushed him back into a game yesterday after he had an apparent injury, to the point where the Pittsburgh Steelers, when they went to tackle him, Micah Fitzpatrick pulled up and kind of like, it was almost like, hey, man, we got to get this dude out of here. I thought it was Muhammad Ali telling the referee to stop the fight against Larry Holmes. Poor way to handle that situation, even though the Colts did go to 2-2. Let's hear from Locked On Colts, and then we'll discuss how they're handling Anthony Richardson.
Narrow win for the Colts, 27-24 over the visiting Pittsburgh Steelers here at Lucas Oil Stadium. Colts now 2-2 on the season, and they bring Pittsburgh's undefeated streak to an end. The big story of this, though, is Anthony Richardson left late in the first quarter with a hip injury. He actually left the field for 2 plays, came back in, and then ran the ball and felt the hip tweak again, and he was out for the game. Joe Flacco came in and pretty much right away led a scoring drive. I think he had 4 for the game, but really was a breath of fresh air compared to what the backup situation could have been for the Colts. But he was able to do enough throughout the game to put some scores on the table for the Colts. So we're going to have a lot more about this on Locked On Colts with our post-game show here shortly. Follow us on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts.
Not a good look, in my opinion, Kevin Oestreicher. I'm not sure if Anthony Richardson's competitiveness asked to go back into the game and then he couldn't go. But either way, I think a coach and a team has to protect the player from himself.
Yeah, and that's the responsibility, right? Where, players are competitive. They want to go back in the game. They want to tough it out, and that's just the nature of these guys. But when you have something like that happen and then you bring him back in and the first play is immediately he's running and just gets clobbered again and you're done. I mean, that it's not smart by anybody. By anybody, you have to be able to manage your players better that way. That's what the coaching staff is there for. Because look, if it was up to the players, these guys would be playing through broken arms and torn ligaments, and they'd say, "Hey, let me will my team to a win." But when you're the organization, that is your responsibility. And we're not really thinking about this wig from on the field perspective. Joe Flacco came in and he did his thing, and the Colts won the game, so it was no harm, no foul. No, I think there still is harm and foul because they mismanaged this situation with a young quarterback that we know was a raw prospect. You said it, and still has a long way to go in terms of growing, but it's not helping him if you're putting him in situations where he is at risk and can get injured, re-injured, and that does nothing for his long-term development. So I think you got to be smarter than that if you're the Colts.
Yep, and you're very familiar with Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco didn't do anything that surprised us by coming in and being able to throw the ball around. He did it last year for Cleveland. He's going to be able to do that. But we also have to remember, Joe Flacco has been let go by a whole bunch of teams since he was the Super Bowl MVP. And he is like 67 years old or something. So I don't want them to sit here and think that this is sustainable. Win the games, get the W, but the coach got to do a better job, in my opinion, especially when the examples around the league of how you bring quarterbacks along slowly and there not being a rush. They really have to do a better job, I think, of managing Anthony Richardson and managing how they put him in these positions that could basically ruin him in the future. And then he'll be around here walking around all bandaged up and Jalen Hurts looking like he got cast on both arms and all kinds of stuff going on underneath. Jalen Hurts looks like he's going into battle in the military. I'm telling you, man, with all of that stuff he has on. So maybe these folks will start realizing that there's a certain way you handle quarterbacks. There's a certain way you have to deal with the NFL players. Also, real quick, tonight's action. Miami got cooked. Make sure you check out Locked on Dolphins and hear Kyle Krabs going off. Miami looks like one of the worst teams in the league. Also, Detroit. We just talked about Sam Darnold. I was so geeked up for Detroit and Green Bay this year. I'm thinking that the game is Green Bay, Minnesota. Green Bay, Minnesota is the one that I want to see because those teams are gritty, they're nasty, and they play really, really good, hard defense. I'm looking forward to that. Striker, what about you?
Yeah, 100%. And look, the NFC North has been crazy this year. Maybe not so much Chicago, but the other three teams have been showing stuff. Even the Packers get a gritty win without Jordan Love, and Malik Willis goes in there against Tennessee. And obviously, we talked about Minnesota and this Detroit team, man. I mean, Jared Goff, perfect on Monday Night Football. David Montgomery just bouncing off tackles like it's nobody's business. And Amon-Ra St. Brown getting a little passing touchdown action in there too. So this Detroit team, man, one of the best teams in the NFL. And I know coming off a disappointing NFC Championship loss where they kind of blew that game, Dan Campbell's coming for revenge, biting kneecaps off and all. He's coming for it.
He is. I got a question to ask you about the Ravens. How have they been able to – I've never seen the team – I said this yesterday to Julian Council. I've never seen the team fix their offensive line within the first four seasons. They look like they had maybe the worst offensive line in the league, and all of a sudden now you see what Henry and Jackson can do when they have a little bit of blocking.
Yeah, part of it is I just think they gelled together, and sometimes it's as simple as that, where for Baltimore, they lost three starters, and you're sitting there thinking, well, how are they going to replace them? They replace them with young guys, but one of the young guys didn't play in this Buffalo game, so they put a vet in Patrick McCary at left guard. They had Roger Rosengarten, who's their rookie, who's been playing really well in his opportunities. He started at right tackle, and they're everybody's blocking. Mark Andrews has had 2 games with no receptions straight, super unheard of for him. He's getting dirty in the blocking game. PFF graded him out as the highest graded blocking grade of his entire career last week. So everybody's getting involved. Ronnie Stanley is a big part of this too. He looks healthy after a couple of really, really injury-riddled seasons. Tyler Linderbaum's really good, and they've found their footing. They haven't thrown the ball a bunch, but in the run game, we know that this is the bread and butter of this team. Be super physical up front, get to the second level, seal off the edges, and Derrick Henry and Lamar can do the rest on the ground. And the Ravens didn't really figure out how to utilize Derrick Henry until the last couple of weeks, but I think from here on out, it's going to hopefully start to roll for them.
Yeah, I think they're one of the hottest teams in the league. They look like one of the 4 best teams in the league. We'll see how it all works out. But Kevin Striker, you'll be every Tuesday with me, man. And the folks can find you over on Locked On Ravens on a daily basis. Check that out. Check me out on Locked On Jaguars. But make sure you make your second listen the new Locked On NFL show. Tune in tomorrow morning with Tyler Rowland, the madman. He is going to have all of the action, including all of the action from every single game that you can check out over the Locked On Podcast Network in the entire NFL with the experts that give it to you like nobody else can. And then check me out here on the Barbershop every single day on Locked On NFL, the new Locked On NFL, where it's your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. For Kevin Ostriker, for Tony Wiggins, till next time, y'all take care of each other and we'll do the same.